back to the phone lines. We'll talk next to Dan, Seattle, Washington, KCIS. Hi, Dan.
Hi, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Not too bad, not too bad. Hey, so I had a question for you. My dad and I were having kind of a discussion over the weekend, and it got me thinking. And I was curious if you could shed some light on kind of salvation in Old Testament versus New Testament. A couple examples that we had talked about were, like, for instance, David in the Old Testament, having many wives and concubines, but was still blessed by the Lord, and I believe him to be a saved individual. But then you have other examples, like when they were carrying the ark from one place to another, the Lord told him not to touch it, and when it fell over, one guy touched it and was struck dead. And so my question would be, would that person who touched the ark still have that promise of heaven and go there? And what the difference would be between like an individual like that and David?
Well, remember that ultimately we don't know who will be in heaven. We know in principle, however, how people are saved. And in the Old Testament, people were saved because they looked forward to the promise. And you see that particularly in the example given by Paul in Romans chapter 4 with respect to the Old Testament patriarch Abraham. So Abraham was saved. Why? Because he looked forward to the promise in faith. So he looked forward through a glass darkly. He looked forward via types and shadows. We see clearly because the cross has come. So we look back at the cross. They looked forward to the cross, but they did so through all kinds of means that projected the coming of a Messiah. So we're saved in exactly the same way, whether in the Old Testament or in the New Testament. But who is saved, we cannot say with certainty. Now, I think you can say with certainty that David, Israel's quintessential king, was a man after God's own heart, and therefore every evidence in Scripture points to the fact that David was saved. His son Solomon, we don't know for sure. Solomon was the wisest man who ever lived. He also was a man who followed the Lord and followed the wisdom of God, but towards the end of his life, pagan wives and concubines turned his eyes from the Lord, and he started building altars to idols. So we don't really know. We look at the outward appearance, God looks at the heart. But we do know the principle. We are saved in the Old Testament the same as we are in the New Testament. And I wrote about this in an entry in the Complete Bible Answer Book, Collector's Edition, How Were People Who Lived Before the Time of Christ Saved? If you want a copy of that, just hang on or order the book. We'll be right back in just a few moments with more answers to your questions right here on the Bible Answer Men broadcast. Stay tuned for that.